Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on what part of the country you are calling in from. My name is Ginger Bell. I would like to welcome you to our Trends in Compliance webinar series. Today, we will be talking about the ins and outs of FHA compliance and enforcement. And as everyone is logging in today, I'm going to take care of some housekeeping issues. So, first of all, you will be able to see my slides. I will be forwarding the slides as we go through the session today. And for those of you who have not been on a GoToWebinar before, you can ask questions. And you can do that by typing into the question bar that is located on your screen. And you can go ahead and we'll test that right now. I'm going to actually get back onto my webinar because it paused me for a second. So if you will go ahead and type in the panel there and let me know that you can hear me, and put in what part of the country you're calling in from. We were actually just talking at the beginning of this session that the pollen count is high for everyone out there, and so I don't know if you are experiencing that where you're at or not, but hopefully it is beautiful weather where you are. And so I see you typing in there, so that's great. So if you have questions today, we will be taking some breaks throughout the session, so if you have questions for clarity or want to have a particular question answer, type them in that panel. I'll be looking at those as we go through the session today. We do have the slide deck available for you, and that's in a handout, and you can see that right there. It's on your GoToWebinar panel, so if you click on that, you can download it right onto your computer and have that to print out or follow along if you'd like to do that. So we'll let you access that information. And we want to thank our partners for putting this information together for you. We've been doing our webinar series for a little over a year now and focusing on compliance trends, what we're seeing, and constantly changing. I know I was talking to Karen, our presenter today, as we were getting ready for the session, and FHA put out a new mortgagee letter just recently. I think it was just yesterday, so a quick updating slides. So we have those updates in there for you. And then, of course, thank you to Strategic Compliance Partners, a great partner in compliance, and to the Collingwood Group, who is our special presenter today. And myself, Ginger, I am with Go2Training. I'm an education specialist in the mortgage industry, and I work with companies to help them develop and implement training programs. So I'd like to introduce you to our presenter today, Karen Garner, and Karen serves as the Managing Director in the Professional Services Group with the Collingwood Group. She plans and oversees engagements that focus on FHA, VA single-family mortgage loan program compliance, and she has managed and participated in many projects in support of clients' False Claim Act lawsuits. Prior to joining Collingwood, Karen was employed at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for 23 years, after which she served as a HUD contractor for 8 years. And so Karen's knowledge and expertise is very welcome, and we really appreciate her putting this information and sharing her expertise in our Trends in Compliance webinar series. So we'll go ahead and get started, and today we're focusing on the ins and outs of FHA compliance and enforcement. So Karen, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to going through the information that you have put together. And so I'm going to actually start out with the first question, and that is, who is responsible for monitoring lenders and servicers at HUD?
So, well, thank you, Ginger. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And the answer is there are many people that are doing
Right.
The reviews at HUD. As probably everyone on the phone knows, different people from different organizations have shown up at their door with their badge. So I'm going to go through them somewhat in order of who you're most likely to see. The first being, and you won't see these people, more so you will hear from them via email, are the FHA homeownership centers, or HOCs. They do the post-endorsement technical reviews of recently closed loans, and they are more affectionately called PETA reviews. So we'll get into the PETA reviews a little bit later. The next group is the Quality Assurance Division. So that's one of the groups I worked at when I was at FHA. Their most frequent type of review is on loan origination. They also go to servicers to do reviews, but it's on a less frequent basis. Then you will get claims reviews, and those right now are being done by FHA staff. The group least likely to show up at your door, but between all of us, probably the scariest group, is the HUD Inspector General Office. So they focus primarily on FHA program reviews, but of late, the past few years, that is the organization that has been issuing subpoenas for files, and based on the review results, that is the group that's been referring matters to the Department of Justice for a False Claim Act lawsuit. So that is what qualifies them probably as the scary group.
Right, which is the one you obviously don't want at your doorstep.
Correct.
So talking about then what we're looking at as far as the Quality Assurance Division, why do we have the QAD reviews?
So QAD, again, the staff there focus on lender reviews. That is their sole job. And they're looking to see that your operation and your loan files are compliant with FHA requirements. And again, they do both origination and servicing reviews. While they do not publish all of their criteria for how they select the lenders, I know that some of the key factors are volume, early payment defaults, and your compare ratio. So if you're not familiar with FHA speak on compare ratio, it is the number for loan origination. It is the percent of loans you originated that are seriously delinquent or claim paid. And seriously delinquent they define as 90 days plus. So that percentage divided by the percentage of all FHA lenders seriously delinquent and claim paid loans for the geographic area. So the term compare ratio, it's really comparing your portfolio to all of the other FHA lenders. The geographic area can literally be the entire country, a state, a census tract, all the way down to a zip code. For servicing reviews, the Quality Assurance Division reviews are primarily driven by volume, but they will also look at what they call a workout ratio. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later and what that is, but it's basically the number of incentive claims you, the servicer, have been paid divided by the sum of your incentive claims and conveyance claims. So workout ratio really is just that. How successful are you at doing loss mitigation and working out the loan so it does not result in a conveyance claim?
Right, makes sense. So then moving on and looking at the HUD OIG audits, why would someone fall into an audit there?
So on an annual basis, the HUD Inspector General establishes some goals. Typically, their goals are around an FHA program area. So for example, right now, based on contacts with our clients, they seem to be looking at the HECM, the reverse program, and also FHA loans that were originated with down payment assistance. So they sort of pick a program area, and then they may come into a lender or servicer shop if that servicer, say, like I said, right now is doing a lot of HECM loans. They occasionally will do an audit if they get a hotline complaint, but to be honest, they rarely get any consumer complaints, but that can be a trigger. as well for them. The False Claim Act lawsuits, from everything we can see, those have been based primarily on volume. So if you all read the newspaper and see some of the settlements, I think it's pretty easy to see they somewhat started with the largest FHA lender by volume and just worked their way down the list.
Gotcha. And then, moving on to what we're looking at with the FHA claim compliance reviews, what can someone expect to see there?
Okay, so like I said, the claims reviews are currently being done by FHA staff, and from what we're hearing, for the most part, they're mail-in reviews. So in other words, you get a letter and you're asked to submit your claim files to them for review. Servicers that file 100 or more claims a year, FHA tries to review them annually if they can. But the overall goal is they want to do a review at every servicer who has filed 5 or more claims, at least one review every 3 years.
So that becomes pretty standard then based on that criteria.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And moving on then, let's look at FHA homeownership center reviews. So why are they reviewed?
They're reviewed to some degree like the QAD reviews. They're looking for compliance with FHA requirements, but because they literally do these reviews kind of a loan at a time, as opposed to the quality assurance division where they may ask for 10 loans, 50 loans, something like that. The PETA reviews focus for the most part on loans that were recently closed. So based on information FHA has published, as of the end of December in 2016, for the quarter, they did, if you're ready for this, 53,000 plus reviews.
Wow.
So they looked at over 53,000 FHA loan files. Out of that group, 75% were purchase loans, 10% streamline refis, 7% rate and term refis, and 8% HECM. And out of that 53,000, 41% were performing and 58% were early payment defaults. So as you can see, their preference is to select loans that are early payment defaults.
Right.
And if you're not familiar with that criteria, it's basically where an FHA loan becomes 60 days delinquent and the borrower made 6 or fewer payments. So I think it's obvious why that's their preference. They will also look at lenders that are new to the DE program or had new authorities. Occasionally, like the IG, they may also use criteria of a particular loan product. So say, for example, they may want to focus on ARM loans.
Right.
So that's their basic criteria.
Right. That makes sense. So moving on then, looking at servicers and talking about the National Servicing Center reviews, how are servicers selected for the tier ranking system 2 reviews?
Okay, so the tier ranking system, unless a servicer says they do not want to be included, the Oklahoma City office will pretty much look at all servicers, and what they're focused on really is looking at the data to see how often and how successfully you are using the loss mitigation, and they rank based upon performance, and lenders that end up in certain tiers, i.e. you're really doing well with loss mitigation, receive certain additional financial benefits when they're filing a claim.
Very interesting. So obviously focusing on FHA and the tools that are available, and there are many tools to consider with Credit Watch termination and direct endorsement termination. And obviously there's some recent announcements on that as well that you're going to cover. But what advice do you suggest on utilizing these tools?
Okay, so the thing first off about the Credit Watch termination regulations, they were put in place for sort of a number of years ago. And the reason for that is up until these regulations came into being, the only way FHA could address deficiencies was on a loan-by-loan basis. So, looking at a loan file, finding something. And they said, from a business decision, we may wish to terminate a lender's ability to participate in a given area if they're just not performing well. So there again, it's not looking at the loans, it's just looking at the data. But the regulations also say, but you know what, we're also going to account for volume, and we're going to account for the fact that if you're originating loans in an underserved area, because those obviously, are loans that are high priority to FHA. So I gave an example here to kind of explain how on the origination side this works. So a lender originates almost 400 loans in the last 24 months in the state of New Jersey. Their seriously delinquent percentage is 2.27. When you compare that lender's New Jersey loans, so i.e. properties in New Jersey, to all of the other lenders that have loans in New Jersey, their delinquency and claim paid rates is 1.77%. So that has now translated to a compare ratio of 128. So basically a compare ratio at 100 means you're on equal playing field with everybody else in that geographic area. Anything over 100 means your loans are not performing as well.
So really it's important to keep an eye on that as far as a comparison and how they're comparing, not just overall, but in certain areas.
Yes, it is. And we find many lenders often know their national numbers, but they don't dive in to look at their performance in other geographic areas. And I'll talk about that in a little bit later as well. But you're right, you have to monitor yourself the same way FHA is monitoring you. So again, based on this data analysis, FHA runs it every quarter. They have the option of either, it's two different things. They can terminate your ability to originate loans, so a branch office within a certain geographic area, or they can terminate your approval to underwrite loans. And again, the important thing is it's within a certain geographic area. And I laid out the criteria here, but the bottom line is if your performance is twice as bad, so you've got a compare ratio of 200 or above, and you're above the national rate, they may be able to take one of these actions. And I'll explain the may in just a minute. If you're a lender insurance lender, so that means you're self-insuring your loans, the threshold there is they look at the all states compare ratio, and if it's over 150. So it's a lower threshold, but when you think about it, the ability to self-insure is a much bigger risk to FHA. Also, the reason I said they may terminate, the way the process works is you get a notification letter. You're allowed to provide an answer to that letter and request a conference. And at that time, you can explain to FHA, what you found, what you've done to mitigate things. So, Ginger, back to your comment about monitoring. So if you get one of these letters and your answer to FHA is, oh my gosh, I didn't know I wasn't performing well in New Jersey, you might guess that's the wrong answer.
Exactly.
They want to know that you've been monitoring yourself and you were on top of it and you already knew you had some problems in that area. And these are all the things you've done to fix them.
Right. And documenting that too is important. So it's not just enough to, as we talk about in compliance, to, have your policies and procedures and everything in place, but you have to monitor it and then track what you're doing as far as correcting that as well, which is so important in them deciding whether or not to terminate or not terminate.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. Yes.
Makes sense. So the changes that are coming up then as far as FHA for reviews, and we know there's always changes, so what can we expect for that now?
Okay, so the latest and greatest is the new loan file review system. And as Ginger was saying at the very beginning, a new mortgagee letter just came out, and it's confirming that they intend to roll out this loan file review system May 15th. So the system will be used for both the HOC-PETA reviews that we talked about, as well as quality assurance division reviews. So basically the way it's going to work is you will receive an electronic message, if you will, an email via this system. It will be sent to your primary contact, notifying you that a homeownership center did a HOC review on loan number 1, 2, and 3. Here's the findings. Or it may be from the quality assurance division. So you will then go in and see what the finding is, and you will use the system to send in a rebuttal, including uploading documentation. So not only is the system new, but the key to all this is this system will be used to implement the defect taxonomy. So if you all have not heard of that, FHA back in June of 2015 put out a document, and they basically said at some future date, and the date is now, we're going to implement this defect taxonomy. So what it's set up, if you can kind of think of a grid, and the first column is a list of defect codes, and those defect codes will be associated with things like income, eligibility, credit. The next column is an explanation as to the source of the defect, and then it talks about the cause of the defect. It also has established, which I think is probably one of the most important things for all lenders, is severity tiers. So there's going to be 4 tiers, and based on those tiers, FHA will then have different enforcement actions. So tiers 1 and 2 in the defect taxonomy may result in a request for indemnification, because those are the most severe in nature. So for example, Tier 1 findings may reflect fraud, data entry errors in your AOS system that are significantly inconsistent. A Tier 2 may be a deficiency, such as an error causing the loan to exceed allowable limits by a large margin, or where the loan failed to meet FHA requirements by a large degree. So again, these are the most serious type findings. Tiers 3 and 4 obviously have less severity, but there are still issues that FHA wants to tell you about, and they obviously want you to fix it. If you don't have this June 18th, 2015 document, I strongly suggest you get it. You may even want to start thinking about aligning some of your QC around this. But at the end of these slides, I have a link, but if you go to the FHA website or the HUD.gov website and just type in defect taxonomy, you'll be able to pull up that 2015 document.
Wow, just that term alone is a little intimidating. So we have
yeah, it is.
So we have a question in, Karen, that I'm going to kind of insert here because, we're talking about findings and QC and monitoring. And so we have a question in from Heather wanting to know, is the monitoring done using the neighborhood watch reports?
Okay, you mean so based on neighborhood watch reports, FHA determines who to do PETA or HOC or
Yes.
QAD reviews?
Right.
Okay. And the answer is yes. So there again, it's kind of back to what I was saying about Credit Watch.
Right.
Using Neighborhood Watch, you can monitor yourself the same way FHA does. So let me give you a couple more examples. In Neighborhood Watch, like I said, you can look at your entire company, but the Quality Assurance Division will look more by branches, because obviously the different HOCs The different QAD staff are responsible for different territories. So they are less likely for loan originators to just look at your corporate number. They're going to start drilling down by state and by branch. So you can go into Neighborhood Watch and get the compare ratio for every branch, for all the loans they originate. There again, you can break down the branches numbers by zip code. So you can really drill into, I guess you could say, a small geographic area. And that, yes, FHA will definitely use Neighborhood Watch to do that. And again, I can't say it enough, and you all should too. I mean, your QC folks, particularly the people that are doing sampling or your chief risk officer, someone there really needs to know Neighborhood Watch well and how to do all these comparisons that you can.
Right. Well, it ties into a lot of what a company's doing for their fair lending analysis as well.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So
hopefully, Heather, if that didn't answer your question, let me know.
Yeah, and Heather, feel free to type in there. Obviously, we have Karen's contact information as well, so you'll be able to reach out with her to ask any additional questions. So, new system coming up, just about a month away. So what can we expect as far as help in being able to prepare for this new system, the loan review system, Karen?
Yeah. So I've listed a couple of suggestions here. I also have to make a note at the very bottom. It says resources, and I have to apologize that with the new mortgagee letter, I gave the new information to Ginger, but I misstated the letter. So at the very bottom, the latest and greatest information is actually mortgagee letter 2017-08, and it's hot off the press. The ink is barely dry. So first thing I would do is make sure you've read the mortgagee letters.
Right.
One of the things you need to be doing is you do have to assign someone to be the contact person, and that's sort of there in the middle of the screen, an administrative contact. And you do that by going into FHA Connection and then the LEAP system. And the reason it's so important that you assign this to someone that you can count on is because you will be counting on that person to get all these notifications. So it needs to be someone that's going to look at that system every day and make sure the right person is informed. Besides the fact that obviously it's just important to do this, one of the other big changes with this new loan review system are the deadlines that you have to respond.
Wow.
And they've been shortened. So again, it's not like you're working with Mary Smith in the QAD division and she came to your office and you met and you can email her and say, can I have a little more time? You've now got a system that's counting, the clock is running. So again, the administrative person and making sure you respond to these deadlines is imperative.
Right.
In this.
So
FHA, I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to talk about assigning someone and just always thinking about for planning, just because you have one person assigned, obviously having a backup person trained on that as well is critical to make sure, and especially because there's such a tight deadline on this. If somebody goes on vacation for 2 weeks and a deadline comes up, you want to make sure that
Right.
you have cross-trained someone else to be able to cover that function as well.
Yes, exactly. Let's see. I'm just trying to make sure I've covered everything. Oh, I know the other thing I was going to say. The other way to get prepared too, FHA has already held a couple of webinars.
Right.
And you can get those webinars from the FHA website, but they also have one coming up on April 26th. They're free, but you do have to register. So again, I would strongly encourage that if you haven't listened or participated in any of the FHA webinars, that you do that to kind of get caught up on the past ones and then sign up for the one on April 26th.
Right. Yeah, very critical. So go on to HUD's website, or Google is always my friend. So you can just type in there LRS webinars HUD, and you can easily find that information. Karen, we can probably grab that information and send out a follow-up email as well with a link to that. So I don't know if they're going to be maxed out. I'm assuming they will as far as attendees. So you might want to do that right away, and we'll see if we can find that information and do a follow-up. And then the other thing too on this page, that mortgagee letter, as Karen noted, is 2017-8. We're anticipating the -14. I'm sure that'll be coming out soon, but this particular, Karen's just jumping ahead. Forward thinker, I like that. I like
There
it.
we go. There we go. I mean,
Perfect.
anticipating the next rollout.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So it's 2017-8 is the mortgagee letter you want to go and reference to. So let's move on from, what we've talked about as far as what HUD's going to do for, what they're looking for, reviews and obviously the changes. And let's talk about what happens if someone does find themselves in a situation of an audit. So looking at what a company goes through in an audit and what type of enforcement is possible.
Okay. So these all really apply across the board, the different sanctions I'm going to talk about, but primarily you're going to see them on origination and servicing reviews and the OIG reviews. Claim reviews really are all about, we've paid a claim of X dollars and you don't have the documentation to support all of it, so I want my money back. So the claim reviews really are just about getting the dollars back that had already been paid in error. So again, these enforcement options really focus on the servicers and lender reviews. So both FHA and the HUD Mortgagee Review Board have a variety of sanctions. They go everywhere from a letter of reprimand to full withdrawal of a lender or servicer's FHA approval. But the most frequent enforcement tool is a request for indemnification, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail to come, in another slide. The QA, Quality Assurance Division staff can also refer cases to the HUD Inspector General, to HUD's Fair Housing. So for example, when I talked earlier about the HUD audits, those are done by the HUD audit, the auditors and the Inspector General. But if the Quality Assurance Division or the HOCs think that there may be fraud, they can also do a referral to HUD's investigation side, and those are the folks with a badge and a gun. So that's an option they have.
Not a good combo.
No, that is a really bad combination. Yeah. To be honest, thankfully it doesn't happen very often, but
right.
it is a possible tool. They could send stuff to the CFPB, and like I said, we all know that things have been also ending up with the Department of Justice. So those are some of the different options that's in place.
Right.
And again, these are lender options.
Right. And moving on beyond the lender options, how does it affect an individual? And we're not just talking about the D underwriter here, are we?
No. It really is pretty much anyone involved, in the loan process. It can be an appraiser, could be a corporate officer, could be the seller, a real estate agent. So, it is a long list. And the sanctions include a limited denial of participation. That's basically where a person is excluded from participation in a specific HUD program. So for us today, you'd be precluded from participating in single-family mortgage loans. And the sanction would be imposed for a period not to exceed 12 months. A suspension is a government-wide action. It's a temporary action that makes an individual ineligible to participate in pretty much all government programs. And suspensions are usually done while an agency is waiting for an investigation or legal proceedings to be ended. A debarment is a final action against an individual where they have engaged in prohibited conduct and they have been deemed to be not presently responsible. It precludes the person from participating again in almost all federal programs. The duration usually is up to 3 years, but in some cases it can be longer. Another option too is civil money penalties. So these are monetary fines, if you will. Those can also be levied against individual people.
All right. So you talked a little bit earlier about indemnification agreements. So I think you're going to expand on that a little bit as far as what that looks like as well.
Right. So I put the regulatory citation there just in case anyone just loves reading the Federal Register. But as I said before, these are probably the most frequently used enforcement tool, but they are to be used when there is a material deficiency, and that applies to both origination and servicing violations. The period of the agreement is usually 5 years from the date the loan is endorsed, but it could be for the life of the loan. The ones for the life of the loan tend to be more related to the property and things like that, health and safety. The critical thing, and I think this is where a lot of people get hung up, is that the lender or servicer that committed the violation is the one HUD will hold accountable. So if you're originating a loan and you sell it and there's an origination violation, the servicer, first off, probably doesn't even know about the agreement, but the servicer can go ahead and file a claim and get their money. They're not held responsible because they didn't originate the loan. They didn't do the wrongdoing, if you will.
So in that case, it stays with the originator.
Correct. And the originator is the one that's going to get the bill.
Right.
Now, the only exception to this is if you originated and you're servicing the loan.
Right.
So if the originator and servicer are the same, the agreements pretty much say you can't file a claim if the loan goes bad. Oftentimes, the request for indemnification, again, it's around a loan with a material finding. Oftentimes, the finding is related to missing documentation. So for a lot of these, the remediation of the finding literally is just to find the missing documents. That I can't tell you how often that is the problem. So if you sign an agreement, and we'll say for 5 years, the loan goes bad, the bill that you would get, the way it's calculated is FHA takes the amount of money it paid out in the claim, and then from that it subtracts what they got when they sold the REO property. So the difference between the two is what you would get billed.
Very interesting. So, you know, we've talked about a lot for self-monitoring and how important that is. And looking at that, you know, it's not just enough to have the oversight and the safeguards in place. Monitoring is really at the core of what a company should be doing. So what types of self-monitoring can a company do to help mitigate their risks?
Okay, so, you know, the first thing obviously are the quality control reviews. Now, you know, of course, FHA requires them, but obviously they're a good way to mitigate your risk, both FHA and investor-wise. On the origination side, you're required to do both pre and post-closing reviews. And for servicing, you're required to do reviews on a monthly basis. I'm sorry, and the origination is monthly too. So every month you have to complete quality control reviews. The sampling, the number of loans you have to review depends on your portfolio size for a servicer, how many loans you close for an originator. But you're required to pull a random sample and a discretionary sample. And Heather, back when you were asking about Neighborhood Watch is a great tool to use to help you when you're pulling that discretionary sample, because you've looked to see, like I said, do you have any branches with a high default rate? Do you have particular, profile around a loan, maybe more ARM loans, something like that. So if you look at Neighborhood Watch first and you start seeing some pain points, that will help you in then pulling that discretionary sample. Once you've looked at the files, again, whether it's servicing or origination, if you identify a deficiency, look to see if it's isolated or if it's a pattern. Now, FHA requires you to do this, but it's just common sense. I mean, how big is the problem? You need to know that. The other thing is, once the file's been reviewed and now you determine, yes, I have a deficiency, your management team needs to set up corrective action plans. Make sure that they're implemented and they're successful and you're tracking them. It goes back to what Ginger said. You have to document every step of this. When FHA's Quality Assurance Division comes in to do a review, again, whether it's servicing or origination, they will ask for your QC plan and for QC reports. They're going to go through both and make sure that you're following the handbook. So again, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to make sure the plan and the reports contain all of the information that's in that new 4000.1 handbook. At Collingwood, we do a lot of quality control operational assessments, and I would say virtually every time we do one, we find something missing from either the plan or the reports or both. So when we hang up the phone, my suggestion is have your QC people look at that QC plan and make sure it's not missing anything, because that is a for sure finding if you're missing things.
Right, beginning with the base. And I love what you have here, document, document, document. I mean, keeping track of things are so important.
It is, and so oftentimes, we'll be talking to clients, and for example, they'll tell us, yeah, every month after we finished out the month's QC program, I have a monthly meeting, or I send out a blast email to all underwriters, and we talk about all the deficiencies. Like, boy, that's great. And did you document that you did that? Well, no. I mean, so oftentimes, the processes are being done, but no one thinks to document it. So even if it's a blast email, if it's a conference call, just make a note. On this day, I talked to my 5 DE underwriters. We discussed these findings. Stick that piece of paper in a binder. Having that sort of backup documentation, that's the kind of documentation, if you get a credit watch, termination, that's the kind of information FHA wants to hear. Not only do I do it, but I can document everything I've done. So yeah, that's what I said, document. You can't have enough pieces of paper. I mean, think back on the audits you've had done. Has anybody ever told you you had too much good information? No. They always come back and say, oh, we're missing X. So you can't have too much good documentation.
Right. And that the corrective action plan, too, to make sure that, first of all, it is in place, and that obviously you're following it and monitoring that as well. So when corrective action is taken, are you on the next meeting, hey, this happened, are we still following it? Did it take care of the problem? Do we need to tweak it a little bit? Those areas are so important too. It's not just identifying the action that needs to be taken, but make sure that it actually did take place.
Right, exactly. Yep.
So we've talked about the Neighborhood Watch, and that's a great source. Obviously, public data is available there. They can find their own private data. So utilizing that, what are the things that they can use to help them as far as making sure they're doing what they need to do?
So again, a couple of the things that I'll note that sometimes we find lenders don't know about. because again, I'm assuming probably everybody on the call here looks up their compare ratio, things like that, but there are some canned reports that are in Neighborhood Watch. There's one where you can track indemnification agreements, so it will tell you the date signed and the status of the loan. We often hear from people like, well, I sold the loan, so I don't know the status, and I don't know if I'm going to get a bill for this indemnification agreement. Okay, there's a report for that. You as the originator can track and see that. You can also, there's a report on if you're submitting upfront MIP payments late and what that has been costing your company. So like I said, go into the reports, the queries tab. There's a bunch of different CAN reports already there. There's also something called a case status report. If you're not familiar with that, go in, enter an FHA case number. It will give you the entire history of the loan, including the servicing. So again, if you're an originator, you're selling the loans and wondering what's going on with it, it will have the servicing information. Who is the servicer? And if the loan goes delinquent, it will tell you what's going on. The borrower's in loss mitigation, they weren't qualified, et cetera. So those are, I think, some of the things that users often don't know about Neighborhood Watch. The last thing I'll talk about too is the early payment default. That is what you use, your QC team uses to pull the early payment defaulted loans. You're required to do a 100% review, and Neighborhood Watch is where you get that list.
So good information to know. So the final thing we want to talk about is what someone can do as far as preparing for an audit. So, you know, it's inevitable, obviously, for some to have this. So what are the things that the steps they need to take besides panicking and calling you first, which is probably the best thing to do? But, you know, internally, what are the things they need to do?
Yeah, I should have put that on the slide. Call Collingwood first. And then second, so I suggest you maintain a single point of contact. Again, so you can track everything, you know, going on if they're asking for more information. So even if that person has to go elsewhere for answers, make sure you've got one person that knows, you know, what's going on. But the critical thing is make sure you've got all the documentation you need. More often than not, findings around missing documentation. The other thing too is if you consistently put together a bad file, it doesn't give, you know, the auditor a good impression of your company. I mean, when I say give me the loan origination file from start to finish, and you're missing a lot of the documents, it does not leave a good impression either about your operation. So now you're back breathing, you survived the audit, now you get the report. If you agree with the findings, just say you agree, and that's all that you need to say. If you disagree, I would suggest quoting the handbook or the mortgagee letter as often as possible to say, well, I don't agree. I think the handbook maybe is a little squishy. The requirement isn't as clear as it could be. This is how I interpreted it. And again, include supporting documentation. And then at the end of your letter, you know, I think, again, let them know that you've taken the review seriously. You're going to use it to improve your operation so that it doesn't happen again. And try to just be tactful and stick to addressing the findings. Talking about, you know, if you think my compare ratio is bad, you should see the guy down the street. Well, they've probably already seen the guy down the street. So just focus on what they told you did wrong and fix it. Tell them you're going to fix it going forward so it doesn't happen again.
Right. So important. So Karen, great information, and I'd like to share obviously your contact information if you'd like to reach out to Karen and her group. Her email is listed here. It's kgarner@collingwoodllc.com, and her number in the DC area. And then Karen's also provided a variety of FHA resources, and this is available in the slide deck that we've listed under handouts for you, so you can access that there. And then, of course, finding the FHA lender's website which is so important. Get registered for that webinar that is coming up. And Karen, so grateful for providing the information. And you know, there's so much we have to be aware of and know about, and the changes that happen in our industry, which is absolutely constant. And being able to have a resource like the Collingwood Group to be able to contact is so important. So you work in a lot of different areas, obviously, all the business functions as far as helping someone to get set up with best practices, what they need to do as far as False Claims Act, but really just making sure that they're doing what they need to for FHA and then other areas as well. So if you are looking for a resource for that, the Collingwood Group is a great group to be able to connect with on that. So Karen, thank you so much for the information. We are going to stick around for questions. I would also like to thank SCP, Strategic Compliance Partners, which another great resource providing tools to help you stay compliant with your federal and state regulations, including your federal and state policies, compliance training, compliance consulting, and all at a fixed monthly fee. And you know, if you are a new FHA lender that is just getting started, the two resources there between the Collingwood Group and obviously SCP are a great place to be able to help you to manage what you need to in compliance. And myself, Ginger Bell, I work with a variety of lenders and companies within the mortgage industry to help them to design and develop training plans. So we're here as a resource for you. And again, we'd like to thank Karen so much, Karen Garner, great information with the Collingwood Group for sharing the information today. I'm not seeing any questions coming in right now. Yes, we will be recording the webinar, and we'll be sending out a recording. Heather, thank you for that question. So you will get an email with a follow-up link to access this recording. And we'll post that there, and that way you can go back. Make sure you do get registered for HUD's webinars that are coming up as well. And we thank you so much. We'll be announcing when our next webinar is. We might take a break through the summer, but we will look at some of those dates as well. So for all of you on the call, thank you so much. Karen, thank you. And we look forward to seeing you again very soon.